Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Irvin, and I'm a member of the education team at the International Testing Agency. Welcome to the IF webinar series. This is the first in a series of 5 modules brought to you by the International Testing Agency in conjunction with your international federation. And our course today is an introduction to anti-doping. Now, before I go any further in my presentation, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the simultaneous translation options we have for you today. And I see we already have a question about this, so please listen carefully. On your Zoom menu, you'll see a button called Interpretation. The slides and our original audio today are in English, but you can also listen in Arabic, French, Russian, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. And while everyone is settling into the correct channels, please feel free to use the chat function to tell us where you're from, what sport you represent, and what your role is. You can write in English or in one of the languages that we have translation for today. And I can see that we already have about 35 messages from you, so please do keep those coming in. I'm just going to do a shout out to the first 6 people in the chat who were writing in even as the intro music were playing. So that was Miu from Hong Kong. The next 5, I'm not sure where you're from, but a big hi to Fabio, Mohammed, Diego, Parville, and Sabrina. So if anyone else would like to say hi to us, please do let us know what country you are from too. Now, we want this course to be interactive, so we're going to be doing some poll questions throughout. So please do keep an eye out for them. They will all be anonymous. Some are fun, some are tricky, but we hope you all give it a go and try and answer them all. Please also note that this session is being recorded. So first up, I would like to also offer a warm welcome from the International Testing Agency's Director General, Benjamin Cohen. Let's hear from him now.
Hello everyone and welcome to this ITA webinar. My name is Benjamin Cohen and I'm the Director General of the International Testing Agency. I'm very glad that you are here today to learn more about anti-doping. Your role in supporting fair sport, clean sport is extremely important. So I wish to thank you for that on behalf of the ITA, and I hope that you will find the sessions interesting.
And now a big welcome to all of you, our audience. Thank you for joining us here today from the sports of baseball and softball, boxing, golf, gymnastics, judo, luge, skateboarding, and roller sports. These sessions are a big collaboration between all the partners involved, so a big thanks to everyone. Now, this is the first of a 5-week course we are delivering for you. Over the next few weeks, we will cover all the compulsory education topics as set out in the WADA code. We will guide, educate and inform you, helping you keep on top of your anti-doping responsibilities. Each week, we will always tell you the learning objectives and the agenda at the start of the session and leave you with a list of resources where you can get additional information. We will also send you the presentation as a PDF after each session. The idea is that over the 5 courses, we build your knowledge of anti-doping, so at the end, you have a complete overview of the subject. We'll also send you a quick survey at the end of each webinar, so we'd really appreciate if you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in for us. Now, I know these are always popular, so we are pleased to offer course completion certificates to all athletes and athlete support personnel who attend all 5 courses. So please make sure to join us every week. We do monitor attendance using your email address, so please always register with the same email address each week, and that way we can send you the certificate at the end of the series. So in today's session, an introduction to anti-doping, we will cover the following. Firstly, an overview of the anti-doping system. We will take you through the main players in the anti-doping landscape and talk about their responsibilities. We will also take a close look at athlete rights and responsibilities and provide you with some resources to help you understand your role in anti-doping. Finally, we will talk about anti-doping rule violations, how many there are, who they apply to, and what they mean. We're going to do all of this with the help of expert videos. At the end of this session, we will be joined live by the ITA's Head of Compliance, Gianluca Siracusana, who will help answer any of your questions. And on that note, please don't forget to write your questions in the Q&A box, and you can do this at any time during the session. You can also upvote for the questions that you wish to be answered, and we'll tackle as many as we can at the end of the session. So in summary, by the end of today's session, you should be familiar with the key stakeholders of the global anti-doping system. You should understand which rules apply to members of your sports community. You should understand your anti-doping rights and responsibilities. Understand the 11 anti-doping rule violations, why they exist and who they apply to. And finally, know where to go for more information and who to ask for help. So let's move on to the first point in today's agenda, an overview of the anti-doping system. So I promised that these webinars would be interactive. So let's do a quick fun poll question as a warm-up and a little bit of practice. It's appearing on your screens now. And our first question of the day is, what do WADA and the ITA stand for? There is just one correct answer for this one. You have 3 to choose from. Is it the World Anti-Doping Authority, the International Testing Authority? Is it the World Anti-Doping Agency, the International Testing Authority? Or is it the World Anti-Doping Agency and the International Testing Agency? Now, I've already said what ITA stands for a couple of times in the introduction, so that should give most of you a clue. And I can see that we already have quite a lot of votes coming in. And so far, the most popular answer is answer 3. And while you're all voting, I'm just going to scroll down and do a few more shout outs. I'm sorry, we have so many messages, over 100. I'm not going to get through to you all, but a hello from Zagreb, hello to South Africa. Someone's asking if we can get recordings of the webinar. We will look at that at the end of the series. We'll liaise with your international federations. Hello from Hungary, hello to you in India, Venezuela, Azerbaijan. It's fantastic to see people from all over the world joining us. Okay, so well done. More than 60% of you have voted. So let's close the poll up here and take a look at the final results. And well done. The 62% of you who chose option number 3 are indeed correct. We are both agencies. So like I said, that was just a fun one as a bit of a warm-up to get us all started. Okay, so let's move on now and let's take a look at where the ITA and WADA fit into the wider anti-doping landscape. So here we are on your screens now. This is a visual representation of the anti-doping landscape. We understand it is complex with a lot of different organizations and players involved. Today, we are going to break it down into manageable pieces by explaining some of these key players and how they fit together. In particular, we will look at WADA, the ITA, international federations, or IFs, as you'll hear me say, and national anti-doping organizations, or NADOs, as I will often refer to them. We will also look at how athletes and athlete support personnel interact with these organizations from an anti-doping point of view. Now, before we watch another video clip, let me do an introduction to WADA and some of the documents and terminology you will come across. WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency, as we just learned, and the World Anti-Doping Code is the core document that harmonizes anti-doping policies, rules and regulations within sports organizations and public authorities around the world. All IFs and NADOs are required to have their own anti-doping rules, which are compliant with the code. The code works in conjunction with 8 international standards, which you can see on the screen here. These are technical documents which define anti-doping programs. There are 7 international standards along the bottom, as well as the prohibited list that can be seen on the middle left of the screen. Now, while all of these documents serve an important purpose in the anti-doping system, we recommend that athletes and athlete support personnel are particularly familiar with the following. The prohibited list, and this is something that we will cover more during section 3. The International Standard for Therapeutic Use Exemptions, also known as TUEs. The International Standard for Results Management, and the International Standard for Testing and Investigations. We will talk more about some of these standards over the next few weeks. For now, it's just important to be familiar with the terms. Let's watch that video I was talking about now to learn more about WADA and the ITA.
Hi there, my name is Gianluca Siracusano and I'm Head of Regulatory Compliance at the ITA. The goal of today's segment is to provide you with a simplified overview of the anti-doping landscape. And in particular, we will look at the anti-doping ecosystem. As you can see here, there are many different actors involved in the anti-doping field. So it is important to understand the different roles and responsibilities of all of these actors involved in the anti-doping scene. So if we start with the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, WADA is the global regulator and as such is responsible for harmonizing anti-doping policies and processes across all sports and countries. So if we look at the responsibilities of WADA as the global regulator, it is responsible for adopting the World Anti-Doping Code and the international standards. And whenever there is a need to update or amend this document, it is WADA's responsibility to do so. Then, as the regulator, WADA oversees the fight against doping and coordinates all the efforts from the different stakeholders. Furthermore, WADA also monitors compliance of all anti-doping programs with the code. In case WADA identifies a non-conformity or a non-compliance in any anti-doping program, it has the authority to issue corrective actions and to request any anti-doping organization to correct any deficiency or problem in an anti-doping program. WADA has an appeal right for any decision rendered at the national or international level. So if they identify that a decision is non-compliant with the code, they have the right to appeal before the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Then WADA also manages the laboratory accreditation process. So they define the requirements for a laboratory to obtain an accreditation and be authorized to analyze anti-doping samples. If we now look into the International Testing Agency, the ITA is an independent organization that delivers anti-doping programs on behalf of anti-doping organizations such as international federations and major event organizers. All anti-doping organizations, they have the ability to delegate the implementation of their anti-doping program to a third-party entity such as the ITA. So the ITA is responsible for managing and implementing anti-doping programs on behalf of those federations that have decided to delegate the program to the ITA. This means that the ITA manages the entire life cycle of the anti-doping program, from testing to prosecution to education, science, therapeutic use exemptions, and so on and so forth. So where does the ITA fit in the stakeholder maps that we have seen earlier? So as we can see now, the ITA is an external party to whom, as we just said, international federations or major event organizers can delegate their program. So that's how it fits in the anti-doping ecosystem.
Okay, so I hope that was helpful in understanding the distinction between the two organizations. But before we go any further, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's continuing to write in the chat. You can see how much it makes me smile to see how many countries are represented. My colleagues and I in the education team really enjoy running these sessions for you, and it's great to see the spirit that everyone is joining in, and we hope you all stay with us over the next 5 weeks. So again, apologies, I'm not going to be able to list all the countries. I'm sure I've missed some, but hi to those of you joining from the Ukraine, Argentina, Sri Lanka, Colombia, Bahrain, Angola, Morocco, Italy, Slovenia, Ghana, Spain, Philippines, Qatar, Portugal, and Indonesia. Okay, we are now going to move on to look at NADOs and IFs, and not only their role in anti-doping, but also how they cooperate with one another. Now we are going to ask you another poll question after we play this next video clip. I'm going to give you a clue. The next question will be about NADO testing, so make sure you are listening carefully.
If we now move into national anti-doping organizations, NADOs, their role is to implement an anti-doping program at the national level. So this starts with adopting anti-doping rules at the national level, and NADOs should be independent from governments and sports authorities. Besides adopting anti-doping rules, NADOs should then implement the anti-doping program at the national level. This means that NADOs have the authority to test any athlete at the national level competing or training in their country. They should prosecute any anti-doping rule violation against any national athlete. They should, for instance, conduct education program aimed, targeted at national level athletes, and they should then conduct all other parts of the anti-doping program at the national level. NADO should cooperate with the other anti-doping organizations, such as international federations, to ensure that the anti-doping programs delivered at the national and international level are coordinated and handled in an efficient manner. If we now move on to international federations, their duty is to implement anti-doping programs at an international level. So, similarly to NADOs, international federations need to adopt international level anti-doping rules, and they need then to implement an anti-doping program at the international level. So their primary focus is on international level athletes. When it comes to the implementation of the anti-doping program, international federations have the duty to organize all the different aspects that are required for any anti-doping programs. This means, for example, that international federations have the duty to test international level athletes. They have the duty to prosecute any anti-doping rule violation against athletes competing at the international level. And, for instance, they should deliver education aimed, targeted at international level athletes. Lastly, as for NADOs, international federations have a duty to cooperate with the other anti-doping stakeholders, such as national anti-doping organizations, major event organizers, WADA, and all other actors involved in the anti-doping program. So if we recap on the roles and responsibilities of NADOs versus international federations, as we have seen, they both have the same duties, but one at the international level and the other at the national level. So NADOs, they have the authority to test many athletes from different sports in the same country. So they can test any athlete competing in a specific country, and also athletes from that country competing abroad or training abroad. On the other hand, international federation, they focus on one single sport, but across different countries. At the same time, it's important to mention that for international federation, as we have seen, the main focus is international level athletes. So those athletes competing at the highest level of the sport.
Okay, so I hope you've all been paying attention as we have our next quiz question coming up, and it will appear on your screens in just a moment. So as I mentioned earlier, let's get thinking about NADOs again. This time it's a multiple choice answer, so there's a clue there. There is more than one correct answer, and you can choose from: do NADOs look after anti-doping for all sports in one country? Do NADOs look after anti-doping for one sport in all countries? NADOs can test an athlete from the NADO country abroad? And the last option, NADOs can test foreign athletes training in the NADO country. Now, this one is a bit trickier. The answers are coming in a little bit slower, particularly as it is multiple choice. So I'll use this little break while everyone is casting their votes to do a few more shout outs. So more countries joining us. We have Mexico, Gambia, St. Lucia, Belarus, Haiti, South Sudan, and Lesotho. Welcome to all of you. Okay, let's turn our attention back to the poll again. And fantastic, I can see almost half of you have had a go. Remember, these are anonymous, so if you're not sure, please just give it a guess. Just another couple of seconds. And I think we might close that up now and take a look at the results. Well, there were in fact 3 correct answers. The only answer that was not correct was option number 2, and I can see that this was by far the least popular answer. So well done, everybody. Really got all the information from Gianluca's video there. So the one that is incorrect, of course, applies to international federations. International federations are the ones that look after anti-doping for one sport, but in all countries. Let's move on then to the second part of today's course, where we're going to take a look at athlete anti-doping rights and responsibilities. Now, when we speak about athlete rights in the anti-doping system, it's important that we mention the Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act that came into effect in 2021. We've added it to the list of resources at the end of this presentation, so you can take a closer look at it in your own time if you wish. We are going to take a brief look at it in the next few moments though, but before we do that, we have another quiz question coming your way. So I'm curious to know how many of you have heard or understand anything about this particular document. You can see the poll question is already on your screen. This is back to being a single choice answer. And is the Anti-Doping Rights Act one of the 8 international standards? Is it the only anti-doping document that athletes need to know? Or is it a document developed by WADA's Athlete Committee? Or the final choice, is it a legally binding document? So this is maybe one of the trickier ones for today, as the answers are coming in a little bit slower. But as we've said before, they are all anonymous, so please do give it a go, even if you're not sure. We're over 40%. Let's see if we can get to 50% in the next few seconds before we close this one up. Okay, Let's stop the voting there and take a look at the answers. Okay, 40% of you chose option 3, so congratulations to all of you. That is indeed correct. It was put together by WADA's athlete committee in conjunction with thousands of athletes around the world. So let's take a closer look at this document. And if we think about the purpose of this document, it's to ensure that athlete rights within anti-doping are clearly set out and accessible. It points to the right place in the code or one of the international standards where more information on a specific athlete right can be found. The Act is made up of 2 parts. Part 1 sets out the 14 rights that are found in the code and in the international standards. Part 2 sets out the recommended athlete rights. So these are not found in the code or international standards, but are recommended to be adopted for best practice. Before we look at the athlete rights in this Act, let me just take a second to point out that even though these are athlete rights, all stakeholders in the sporting community have a responsibility to know, understand, and importantly, promote these rights. So let's take a quick look at the 14 athlete rights now. And you can see the first 7 on your screen. We can't go into a lot of detail on them today as we only have an hour with you. But if you do want to find out more, you can download the document from the links that we will send you. The first right is equality of opportunity. So athletes have the right to equal opportunity in their pursuit of sport to perform at the highest level, both in training and competition. In other words, clean athletes have the right to compete against other clean athletes. Next up, we have equitable and fair testing programs, and they should be implemented in a manner that ensures that all athletes in all countries are tested in compliance with the code and international standards. Then we have medical treatment and protection of health rights. And this one is twofold. First, athletes have the right to be free from any pressure that jeopardizes their health through doping. And second, athletes have the right to a therapeutic use exemption. I'm going to talk more about this later on in the series. Athletes also have the right to justice. This is the right to a fair hearing with a fair and independent hearing panel and a timely decision. On appeal, the athlete has the right to be represented by counsel, although at their own expense. Then we have the right to accountability. Any anti-doping organisation that has jurisdiction over an athlete has to be accountable for their actions or omissions, and athletes have the right to report compliance issues. Then we have whistleblower rights. This is access to anonymous or confidential mechanisms to report any potential or actual doping behaviour. For example, you can report this on the ITA's Reveal platform. And the final one on this slide, athletes have the right to receive education and information from anti-doping organisations, such as what we are doing today, of course. Continuing down our list, here you can see athletes' rights 8 to 14. First on this screen, the right to data protection. A lot of sensitive athlete data is collected, and this right refers specifically to the athlete's right to protection of privacy and personal information. Then there is the right to compensation. The athlete has a right to pursue damages from another athlete or person. This could be particularly relevant if we think about medal reallocation or prize money. Then there is the protected person's right. This refers mainly to minors in the code, but a full definition of this is available in the document's appendix. Then there's the rights during sample collection, and we'll go over this in detail in next week's doping control session. And that's always a fun one, so please do join me for that. And related to it, there's the right to B sample analysis. And this means that in the case of an adverse analytical finding, the athlete can request to have their B sample analysed. Finally, point 13 of the Act states that athletes' other rights and freedoms should not be affected. Right 14 is more of a housekeeping item that describes application and standing as it relates to the code and international standards. Now, athletes have rights, but of course they also have responsibilities too. So let's take a look at these now. First and foremost, it is an athlete's responsibility to be educated and informed and to know and follow the rules. Athletes need to make themselves available for sample collection when requested, and this can be either in or out of competition. Athletes need to inform medical personnel of their obligations as an athlete, especially if they are prescribed medications or treatments. Athletes must also cooperate with anti-doping organisations, and they also need to avoid any cooperation with banned support personnel. And the final one on this slide, athletes need to take full responsibility for what they ingest. And this relates to the principle of strict liability, which we're going to review next. And once again, as with the athlete rights, it goes without saying that the athlete entourage and other members of the sporting system have an obligation to know and to inform their athletes of these rights. So as we saw on the last slide, athletes are responsible for what they ingest. And this is one of the main anti-doping policies known as the strict liability rule. It means that each athlete is strictly liable for the substances found in their body. And an anti-doping rule violation occurs whether or not the athlete intentionally or unintentionally used a prohibited substance. This is one of the reasons it's so important to know your rights and responsibilities. But what's also important to know is that the presence of a prohibited substance is only one type of anti-doping rule violation, or ADRV for short. So let's spend the next few minutes looking at what ADRVs are. So in the code, doping is defined as the occurrence of one or more ADRVs. To familiarise yourself with the different types of ADRVs, let's first take a look at a short introduction clip from the ITA's Head of Legal Affairs, Dominique Leroux-Lecroix.
The World Anti-Doping Code, which is adopted by the World Anti-Doping Agency, commonly known as WADA, sets up the regulatory framework for anti-doping rule violations. The code is adopted by every sports international federation and in every country. Therefore, the anti-doping rule violations apply worldwide and to every athlete.
Okay, well, with that as our introduction, here are all the ADRVs listed on your screen. There are 11 of them. It looks like a lot, but we're going to go through each one now, see what they mean and how they work in practice. So let's watch a video now about rules 2.1 and 2.2.
There are 11 types of anti-doping rule violations, and we will go through each and every one of them. So let's start. There's Article 2.1 of the World Anti-Doping Code, and this is the most commonly known. It's presence of a prohibited substance. This anti-doping rule violations heavily relies on the obligation of the athlete to make sure that no prohibited substance enters his or her body. So this begs the questions, what are prohibited substances? Those substances are contained in a document called the prohibited list. This is maintained by WADA. It's adopted every year and is published on 1st of January, but on exceptional circumstances, it can also be modified throughout the year. Prohibited substance can be banned out of competition, but also at all time. So let's go back to what is this anti-doping rule violation. It occurs as soon as a banned substance is detected in an athlete's urine or blood sample. This is based on the so-called strict liability principle, and it means that the athlete will be liable as soon as a banned substance is detected in his or her body. However, the circumstances surrounding the presence of the banned substance will be taken into consideration, but for the sanctioning part. Now, let's move to the next anti-doping rule violation, which is use or attempted use of a prohibited substance or method. This is a variation of the first 2.1 anti-doping rule violation because it also relies on the athlete's obligation to make sure that he doesn't use banned substance or prohibited method. Let's just talk about prohibited method. So what are they? Those are also listed in the WADA's prohibited list. However, they mainly concern blood, cell, and gene doping. In a nutshell, blood is not a banned substance. However, blood manipulation is obviously doping, therefore it is banned. The key difference between those two ADRVs relies on the means of evidence. A presence case will be established through direct detection of a banned substance. And this always comes from an analysis from a World Anti-Doping Agency accredited laboratory. A use case comes from different means, which we call indirect proof of evidence. For example, the athlete's biological passport values, which indicates the use of doping.
Okay, so let's see how what Dominique has discussed with us applies to a practical example by doing another poll question. And this time the question is quite long. An athlete tests positive after being prescribed a medication containing a prohibited substance by their doctor. They noted it on their doping control form when they were tested. Once again, this is a single choice. You can choose from one of the following three options. The athlete had done enough by noting the medication on their form. The athlete had done enough by getting a prescription from their doctor. And the athlete is liable. They should have received approval, i.e. a therapeutic use exemption, before using a prohibited substance. So as those answers are coming in, I used the last video to take another opportunity to look at the chat. So hello to you all in Angola, Somalia and Lebanon. I'm also seeing some questions that are coming through in the chat, and I can see one here from Jose. We will address that at the end. Please don't worry. And it's a good opportunity as well to remind everyone that if they do have a question that they'd like to ask our legal expert in the next few minutes, then please do pop it into the Q&A. It may get lost in the chat, so apologies if I don't see all of them. Okay, so well done everyone for voting. I can see over half of you have participated, and it's quite clear that there is an overwhelming popular choice here. So let's end the poll at this stage and take a look at the results. So well done, 83% of you chose option 3, and that is indeed the correct answer. And of course, this refers back to the principle of strict liability that we discussed just a few moments ago. So just to underline what that is, the athlete is responsible for any banned substance found in their system, regardless as to how it got there or whether or not there was an intention to cheat. So really, please do remember that as a takeaway from this webinar. Let's move on to the next two ADRVs, and let's take a look at another video clip.
Now, let's move to two other types of anti-doping rule violation that mainly relate to conduct during sample collection. First off, there's Article 2.3. It is the athlete's obligation to provide samples whenever requested from an anti-doping organization. Therefore, evading doping control or refusing to provide a sample is obviously an anti-doping rule violation. The next anti-doping rule violation is whereabouts failure by athletes. This type of anti-doping rule violations only concern athletes who are included in a registered testing pool. Those are usually elite athletes and they have specific obligations to provide their whereabouts. Registered testing pool athletes may breach their RTP obligations. For example, they may not be at the location they had indicated. They may not also file their whereabouts in the system in due time. And those are considered as whereabouts failures. In case of 3 whereabouts failures within 12 months, the athlete will be liable for an anti-doping rule violation. Now, let me pause to clarify who is concerned by those anti-doping rule violations. The first 4 types that we just covered only concern athletes. This is logical because only athletes, strictly speaking, have the obligation not to take banned substance and also to submit to sample collection.
Okay, so now we've learned about the first 4 ADRVs that are applicable only to athletes. Let's take a look at the rest of them now, which are applicable to a much wider group of people, including athlete support personnel and sports administrators.
The next anti-doping rule violation that we will cover concern not only athletes, but athlete support personnel, for example, coaches and doctors, but also anti-doping organization staff, national federation official. Depending on the circumstances, these individuals may also be liable for anti-doping rule violation. So bearing this in mind, let's continue our list of anti-doping rule violations. There's Article 2.5, which is tempering or attempted tempering within the doping control process. A wide set of facts can constitute tempering. For example, a doctor providing forged documents in the scope of a therapeutic use exemption request will be liable for tempering. A coach lying during a disciplinary process to cover his athlete will also be liable for tempering. Now, 2 other anti-doping rule violations which concern the prohibited list. First off, Article 2.6, which is possession of a banned substance. So it's obvious that athletes, but also athlete support personnel, cannot be in possession of banned substance. There are a few exceptions to these. For example, when a doctor carries a banned substance but that are used for emergency treatment, or if an athlete has a therapeutic use exemption. Then there's also Article 2.7, which is trafficking banned substance. This one is self-evident. Athletes, but athlete support personnel, and anyone bound by the code cannot traffic banned substance and therefore would be liable for an anti-doping rule violation. Then there's Article 2.8, which is administration or attempted administration of banned substance. This anti-doping rule violations covers the scenario where an athlete support personnel, but also an athlete would actually inject banned substance or administer banned substance to an athlete or a teammate. Then there's Article 2.9, that is complicity. This catch-all anti-doping rule violations covers a wide area of facts which can be summarized as covering up anti-doping rule violation. It is, for example, the coach helping the athlete flee a doping control, but it also, for example, a doctor encouraging athletes to dope. There's Article 2.10 that is about prohibited association. This infraction concerns athletes or athlete support personnel who are associating with someone who is disqualified. There is the last anti-doping rule violation, which is covered by Article 2.11, which is acts to discourage or to retaliate against reporting to authorities. The aim of this anti-doping rule violation is to protect whistleblowers from those who are trying to prevent them from reporting wrongdoing to authorities. Let me address the when component of anti-doping rule violations. Anti-doping organizations have 10 years to pursue anti-doping rule violations. This is the reason why samples are kept for 10 years for retesting purposes. Therefore, athletes support personnel, but also anyone bound by the code will be liable for their acts up to 10 years after the actual commission of the infraction.
Okay, so once again, I hope you were all listening to that video because it's time for our final quiz question of the day. And again, it is a multiple choice answer, so there is more than one correct answer. If you think about anti-doping rule violations, please select all the correct statements. Firstly, ADRVs 2.1 to 2.4 apply only to athletes. Option 2, ADRVs 2.1 to 2.4 apply to both athletes and athlete support personnel. Next up, ADRVs 2.5 to 2.11 apply only to athlete support personnel. And the final choice, ADRVs 2.5 to 2.11 apply to both athletes and athlete support personnel. Okay, so as we're waiting for all the answers to come through, I knew that I wouldn't be able to cover all the countries, but there is one in particular that I noticed I missed, and it is my own country. So Paul from Scotland, if you're still listening, then a very warm welcome to you to the webinar. Okay, well done everyone. More than half of you have participated in this. There are 2 answers that are more popular than the other 2. Let's take a look and close up the poll and look at the results of our final quiz question of the day. And the most popular answer was the bottom one with 75%. That one is correct. And I'm pleased to say that the second most popular answer, the first one, is also correct. Okay, so before we move to our live Q&A, let's do a quick recap of today's session. So in summary, all members of the sports community are subject to the global anti-doping rules as outlined in the World Anti-Doping Code and the international standards. There are 11 anti-doping rule violations. All 11 apply to athletes, and 7 apply to athletes, athlete support personnel, and other members of the sport community. These rules are in place to protect athletes' health and the right to clean, fair competition. And remember, you are in control. Educate yourself and ask questions. And it's great that you're here today on this journey with me. So to conclude, we are pleased to provide you with some resources for each of the topics that we covered today. There are links to the anti-doping pages of many of the organisations we talked about, and others, such as the Court of Arbitration for Sport, the IOC, and the IPC. You can also see a link to the ITA website and our special Athlete Hub section, where you will also find a lot of resources. And as mentioned, we will send you the slides shortly after the webinar ends, where you'll be able to click on all these links. On this next slide, you'll also see some other useful resources. First one will take you to the Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act that we looked at earlier in the session. The WADA Athlete Committee also hosted a webinar all about this act. So if you do have some time, I would really recommend you tuning into that as well. And then the last 2 links take you to a dedicated page of the WADA website, full of additional education resources as well. They also have an e-learning platform called Adele, which is free and accessible for you to enter. You just need to register first, and there are different courses available in different languages. So that leaves us with a few minutes for your questions. And at this point in time, I would like to welcome back my colleague Gianluca for the last few minutes of this session. Hi, Gianluca.
Hi, Mary. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to see such a high level of participation today.
Thanks so much for joining us. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, but I also see some questions in the chat as well. Maybe I'll start off with one in the chat, and this is from someone called Alberto Gianluca. The question is, what happens when a doctor administers prohibited substance to improve performance and then administers other substances to mask the prohibited substances? So apologies if you haven't seen that one in the chat. Let me know if you'd like me to read any of that out again.
Thank you. That's fine, Mary. Well, thanks, Alberto, for the question. It's indeed quite relevant. We've touched upon earlier on a little bit on the prohibited list. And as you may know, one of the categories under the prohibited list is diuretics and masking agents, S5. So basically, as part of the prohibited list, there is a category of substances which includes those that we call as masking agents, so what you are mentioning. So some administration of substances which have the goal or the scope to mask the administration of another prohibited substance is part of the prohibited list and therefore is prohibited. So the scenario that you have mentioned would be captured as anti-doping rule violation for the administration or the intake of a prohibited substance under two different classes of the prohibited list. So one is the class of the initial prohibited substance that you were referring to, and the second one is the masking agent to mask the administration of the other prohibited substance.
Thanks very much for that, Gianluca. I'm going to switch back to the Q&A now, and there are a couple more sort of housekeeping ones there that I'll tackle. First one is from Camillo, who is asking whether they should access Zoom with the same email address that I registered in the form. So if you're referring to receiving the certificate at the end of the course, then it makes our lives a lot easier if you do register with the same email address every week. That way we can keep a proper track of everyone who's joining. And I think a similar question here from Thomas, who is asking in Spanish, will we receive a certificate and will we take attendance? Yes, Zoom is very helpful. It monitors all of your attendance automatically. So as we said earlier, you'll receive a certificate at the end of the course if you do tune in for all 5 sessions. Then I'll come back to you in a moment, Gianluca. We'll take a look at Miguel's question next. But there was also a question in the chat earlier on that I promised Jose we would come back to. And Jose's question was, is it necessary for world skate athletes to present a NADO or WADA certificate? And the answer is yes. For world skate international competitions, athletes must indeed present one of those 2 options. Okay, so let's move on to Miguel's question. Gianluca, it's really a question for our week 3 webinar, where we will have an expert looking at medications and the prohibited list. But is there anything you'd like to add at this stage?
And I suppose we're referring to the question regarding cannabis?
Apologies. Yes, of course, I should have read that out so that everyone is with us. Yes, Miguel's question is cannabis a banned substance or country related, and also if it's prescribed?
Well, I see there's a lot of interest around the prohibited list, which I think is definitely good news because that's the source of truth for the athletes to understand what can be used and what cannot be used. So to answer the question, yes, cannabis is still on the prohibited list. However, it's important to mention, and I think as Mary was saying, this will be addressed in a future webinar as well. Cannabis has been moved under a special category of substances, which are called substances of abuse. This was a new category that was created under the new code in 2021. And so therefore, the sanctionatory regime for cannabis and for other substances of abuse is a bit different. It's a bit more lenient. There are more rights for the athletes that are available. And if a number of conditions are met, the sanction could be more lenient. So long answer short, yes, they are prohibited, but they are subject to a different sanctionatory regime.
Thanks very much, Gianluca. And the next question we have is in Mandarin Chinese, and a colleague has very kindly translated that for me. So for us all, the question is, how far in advance do I need to apply for a therapeutic use exemption? And I think I might gather that up with a question a little bit further down the list as well, which is if athletes need to use drugs containing prohibited substances immediately because of an urgent disease, what should we do? So again, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, but week 3, we cover all of these, including the therapeutic use exemption in some detail. But for the purposes of today, is there anything you'd like to summarize on this one, Gianluca?
Yeah, just maybe some key principles. The answer would be apply as much in advance as possible. So whenever you need, you know that you need to take a prohibited substance for a valid therapeutic reason, you need to apply immediately. In your international federation anti-doping regulations, you may find specific timelines. Usually it's in general 30 days prior to an event. However, it's also important to mention that, of course, there is also a process which we call an emergency process in case you need to apply for a TOE due to an emergency condition, in which case you may not have that advance notice that you may have, for example, in case of regular diseases or conditions that are more over time. So if you have an emergency, then there is a process which is called an emergency TOE application process, whilst if you have a more regular disease, the obligation for athletes is to apply as much in advance as possible. And in any case, 30 days prior to the event. And then as Mary was saying, I'm sure there will be more information provided to you in the next seminar.
Well, Gianluca, you've answered those so brilliantly. Maybe you can also be our guest for week 3, and we'll try and address as many difficult medications and prohibited list questions to you as possible. But yeah, thank you so much for summarizing those. I think this shows the importance and the interest in the medications and prohibited lists. So whilst I mentioned the doping control session is quite fun next week, please do join us week 3 as well. We'll give you lots of tips about checking medications as well. So Gianluca, massive thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. That just leaves me time to close up this webinar as well. We're looking forward to you joining us during our next session, same time, 2 p.m. CET next Thursday. You can use this QR code to register now. Alternatively, this will be sent to you shortly after the webinar ends. So please make sure to join up for each session individually. Quick shout out for our survey. Please do complete our survey at the end. Let us know how we can improve our services to you. And of course, another reminder that if you attend all 5 sessions, you will receive a course completion certificate. If you still have any questions or anything wasn't answered today, particularly from a legal point of view, please make sure to drop us a line at education@ita.sport. So that's a wrap for today. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next week and have a good rest of the day.